Top boxing news.
Ow! Okay, we'll start with this. Well, we're not all the way done with our weekend recap because this past weekend, just south of the border, two Mexican legends of Mexican boxing locked horns in a long-anticipated fight.
It was years in the making.
In order to decide who really is the queen of Mexican boxing. Who's the queen of boxing south of the border? And when the punches were thrown and the smoke settled, it was Jackie Nava that emerged the victor. Jackie Nava, the Aztec princess who...
I picked Jackie to win this fight.
I picked Jackie to win this fight on points, though I didn't anticipate that the fight would be quite as one-sided as it was. There's no other way to describe Nava versus Juarez of it in Jackie took Bobby to school.
That's what she did.
In a one-sided contest, Jackie Nava pitched a shutout against Bobby Juarez, who was always one step behind Jackie in every arena, in every facet.
She outclassed Bobby.
And there's just not much between them. At least there wasn't ahead of the fight. Both are decorated fighters, former champions, legends of the sport, enough professional experience to go around in the same age group, and at that point in their careers, there wasn't much left for them to do but face each other. Finally lock horns, one legend versus the other.
Because there just wasn't much between them.
Until the opening bell sounded and Jackie Nava effectively separated herself from Bobby Juarez.
She was better in every area.
Stronger, faster, sharper, more accurate, more cerebral.
Because they're both cerebral fighters.
But Jackie's just better. There's no other way to put it. Anybody that took in this fight knows exactly what I'm talking about. If you were in the vicinity of Tijuana, Mexico, you were south of the border, and you took this thing in, and you were here stateside in the San Diego area where you could have taken in this fight with rabbit ears and some doing, Jackie Nava was better in every area.
Combinations, the movement,
the angles. Bobby Juarez did a lot to try and buy herself time, complaining about head clashes that I didn't see. I mean, she did a whole lot of complaining to the ref, and it's because she was being dominated. It's because she was being taken to school, outclassed.
Jackie still got it.
She ain't just got it. I mean, the Jackie Nava that I saw on Saturday night, that Jackie Nava could very well become a champion, a full-fledged world champion in the super bantamweight division. I could see her beating Jamie Mercado, who she helped prepare for that Amanda Serrano fight. If it came down to Nava versus Mercado, I'd go Nava. I'd give a 41-year-old Jackie Nava very good odds to wrestle away that WBA title from Jamie Mercado, who's a lot younger than Jackie, though nowhere near as experienced, and if I'm being honest, nowhere near a good fighter, nowhere near as technically sound, cerebral, or effective. Something similar rings true when it comes to the reigning WBA champion, Mayerling Rivas. I'd give Jackie good odds to beat her.
Jackie's stiffest competition would be Bermudez.
Daniela Bermudez of Argentina, this division's reigning IBF champion, the legend killer herself, who unseated Argentinian legend Marcela Acuña, who Jackie Nava drew with a few years ago, and who beat Bobby Juarez years ago in Bobby's neck of the woods, on Bobby's own home turf in Mexico.
Daniela would be Jackie's stiffest competition at this weight.
Daniela Bermudez, the legend killer, who is out of action at this time because she's with child. That being said,
with the WBO title being vacant,
I would give Jackie Nava very good odds here today to beat either Jamie Mercado or Mayerling Rivas of Venezuela. The thing is, Jackie may not stick around long enough to see herself become a full-fledged champion again in the sport of boxing. I heard a rumor this past weekend that Jackie's calling it a career. This was her swan song, and she's moving into politics. So in spite of this fight with Bobby being for a WBC diamond belt, it may not even be used as a segue to fight for a full-fledged world title. And I would say it's a pity, except legends in the sport of boxing don't often have fairy tale endings to their storied careers. I mean, look at Bernard Hopkins, Miguel Cotto.
More recently, Manny Pacquiao.
Legends in the sport of boxing don't often have fairy tale endings to their storied careers. Whereas here with Jackie, if this is the end, what a great way to go out.
With a big win over her domestic rival.
The truth is that Jackie Nava probably still has enough left to see herself becoming a full-fledged world champion in the super bantamweight division. But I wouldn't be at all sad to see her go under these circumstances, because very few fighters of Jackie's caliber get to retire on a W, on their own terms.
What better way for her to go out?
So if those rumors check out, and this really is the final fight of Jackie Nava's storied career, I'm happy to see her go under these circumstances and wish her nothing but the best in her political exploits. Now, that same Saturday night this past weekend, the main event of the Showtime card, Jamal James versus Butaev. I didn't know much about Butaev, if I'm being honest. Hadn't seen him before, but he left an impression, and he sure left a dent on Jamal James, who he outworked, outlanded.
Stopped Jamal James in 9 rounds.
For his WBA regular title, there was some gripes, some complaints about the stoppage. I understand those gripes. I understand those complaints. It did feel like Jamal James could have finished the round, though finished the round and did what is the question. Absorb more punishment? Because that's the way that the fight was going.
Butaev was breaking him down anyway.
You could argue that in Corrales versus Castillo, Diego Chico Corrales suffered more at the hands of Castillo before turning things around than Jamal James suffered at the hands of Butaev
Before the fight was stopped.
But you know, when you're in the 9th round, you see Jamal James is taking a shellacking, he's taking a beating, he's getting worked inside and out. Not very many places Butaev didn't hit this guy. It's all looking a certain way.
I understand it.
I understand why Celestino Ruiz decided to stop the fight. I get it, and I'm not losing sleep over it because I'm fairly confident Butaev would have went on to do much worse to Jamal James had Jamal been allowed to continue. This was the first leg of the WBA's 4-man tournament featuring Butaev, James, reigning full-fledged champion Yordenis Ugas, and Eimantas Stanionis. This was the first leg of that tournament. With this, Butaev advances to the next phase where he's supposed to face the winner of Ugas versus Stanionis. Been seeing a lot of belly aching from the reigning champion Yordenis Ugas, who doesn't want to have to go through with this. He wants to sit on his hands and wait for Errol Spence Jr. to come back next year, and the WBA, as they won't let him. He's under orders to face his mandatory challenger and participate in this tournament or forfeit the WBA title. And he doesn't have the luxury of doing that because he ain't got the kind of marquee value to where fighting him will still be an incentive for Spence if he ain't got that title.
The only reason he's looking at you is because you've got a belt.
That, and let's be honest, because Ugas seems a bit more beatable than Terrence Crawford. I mean, at no point did Errol Spence Jr. express an interest in facing the winner of Crawford versus Porter, should the winner be Terrence Crawford. We haven't seen that enthusiasm expressed. We have seen an interest from Errol to face Yordenis Ugas ever since Ugas got that belt.
That belt's the only reason he wants to fight you.
And if you vacated to get out of participating in this tournament and adhering to the WBA's orders, Errol won't have any reason, any incentive to fight you. So Yordenis Ugas very much is caught between a rock and a hard place, because even if he does make it past Eimantas Stanionis, he would still have Butaev to deal with. And as we saw this past Saturday, that guy's a handful.
High risk, low reward guy.
The exact kind of guy you don't want to have to fight when you're preserving yourself for a big pay-per-view unification match with what could be a damaged goods Errol Spence. Butaev, guy like him, jeopardizes all of that. The only saving grace I see here is that, should WBA stand on their square, Ugas has to adhere to that order to face Stanionis. Maybe if he beats Stanionis, he can get them to give him some leniency, with a unification match. Maybe he tells those guys, have Butaev step aside. He wants to do the unification match, and they've got the paperwork to prove it early next year, so that Butaev can stand down, perhaps fight someone else, someone like Jaron Boots Ennis. Jaron Boots Ennis, who fought on that same card with Butaev, with Jamal James, stopping Thomas Dulorme in just a round. Jaron Boots Ennis, who expressed an interest in facing Butaev, saying hopefully he'll take the fight in a heartbeat. Ennis saw some of Butaev's victory from ringside seat after he dropped Dulorme twice and stopped him in the first round of the co-feature of Showtime's triple header. Yeah, I watched a little bit of it, Ennis said. Typical, fighter that comes straight forward, tailor-made for my style, but good fighter. But it looked like Jamal James was drained and couldn't really do anything. So who knows? He's a good fighter, but it's levels. I'm on a whole different level right now, and they know how I'm coming. Listen, Jaron Ennis needs to step up in competition. He needs a quality opponent, much better than a Thomas Dulorme. And Yordenis Ugas, he needs a diversion. He needs for Butaev to be distracted with something, someone. So why can't that someone be Jaron Boots Ennis? Let's say Ugas fights Stanionis, and he beats Stanionis. He petitions the WBA to give him an exemption to the mandatory, allows him to go into Errol Spence unification match. Maybe they can get Butaev to step aside. Maybe they can get him to fight Jaron Boots Ennis in the in-between time. I will admit, that will be a bit of a hard sell, a tough one for Butaev's people. Yeah, Butaev probably doesn't care, but his handlers will.
Ennis is a high-risk, low-reward.
Butaev's people might not want to gamble his rank with the WBA, his position in this four-man tournament, against someone the likes of a Jaron Ennis because they don't stand to gain very much out of it. Though in the event that they're willing to play ball, they're willing to step aside, and they're even willing to take on a Jaron Boots Ennis.
The catch-22 is the winner of Spence versus Ugas would have to face him afterwards.
Should Boots beat Butaev in this hypothetical keep busy, step aside fight, that would be the drawback to this scenario. I don't know how it's going to break down. It's all very immaterial right now. We do know that Ugas is very much opposed to this four-man tournament, but it's going to need reconciliation one way or another. And finally, per tweet from Michael Benson, Andy Ruiz Jr., former unified heavyweight champion Andy Ruiz Jr., has stated that he is now planning to return to the ring in January. He named Dillian Whyte, Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua III, and Alexander Usyk as his most desired targets for 2022 on the Last Stand podcast with Brian Custer. And he's going to find himself wanting in 2022 if those are his most desired targets, because we're going to get the easy stuff right out of the way. He's not in a conversation for a Dillian Whyte fight, a Tyson Fury fight, an Anthony Joshua trilogy, or an Alexander Usyk opportunity. He is not in the running for fights with any of those four fighters, and we all know why. Anthony Joshua and Alexander Usyk are set to face each other, and the winner of that fight is now believed to go straight into a fight with the winner of what could be Tyson Fury versus Dillian Whyte. Tyson Fury versus Dillian Whyte, which is set to be ordered by the WBC now that confirmation has come down. They've received medical documentation from Dillian Whyte that verifies his injury, the injury that caused him to pull out of the Otto Wallin fight. Now, why the WBC ruled on that, or why they required that documentation, I'm not sure why, it being that the Otto Wallin fight was not a mandated fight. Dillian wasn't under orders to fight that guy. That wasn't ordered as a final eliminator. Otto Wallin was but a voluntary that Dillian Whyte was going to keep busy with, and the story is he got injured, he pulled out. It is what it is. Why did Dillian have to send the WBC paperwork? Your guess is as good as mine.
But he did, and now they're all set to order the fight.
Leave it to a PBC fighter to wait for Dillian Whyte to be all tied up with something else before they express an interest in facing him, especially after that same Dillian Whyte already made Andy Ruiz Jr. an offer, a multi-million-dollar offer last year to fight. Last year, where Andy Ruiz was missing in action.
Andy Ruiz missed the whole year of 2020.
And you really can't use the pandemic as an excuse when Dillian Whyte himself saw action last year against Alexander Povetkin. And it didn't go Dillian's way, it didn't. But that could have been Andy Ruiz Jr. he was fighting, had Andy accepted Dillian's multi-million-dollar offer. Now he's talking about him being a person of interest in 2022, and I think Andy has missed that boat because Dillian's all set to face Tyson Fury once this order comes down.
I don't think Andy will get the chance to fight either of those guys next year.
I don't. I mean, maybe he could finagle a situation with the loser of the fight. Say Dillian Whyte loses to Tyson Fury, maybe Andy can face Dillian at the tail end of the year, though I've no doubts, given how Andy's been maneuvering, his tune might change by that time, if that's how that works out. I really don't anticipate that Andy Ruiz Jr. will fight either Tyson Fury or Dillian Whyte next year, much less Anthony Joshua for a third time. Anthony Joshua is supposed to be fighting Alexander Usyk early next year in their rematch. And depending on what happens that rematch, if Anthony Joshua avenges the loss, the feeling is Anthony Joshua is going to move into that undisputed title fight with the winner of Fury versus Whyte.
Neither one of those two guys are available to Andy.
I think the most realistic option for Andy Ruiz Jr. on this hit list is a Deontay Wilder fight. As Deontay Wilder, Andy Ruiz, they're both PBC fighters. They have the same network affiliates. I've said it in the past. A fight between them could actually do good business, so long as the guarantees aren't astronomical and the operational costs of the pay-per-view, as I've no doubts it would be billed as such. It would likely be billed as a Fox PBC pay-per-view. So long as the costs are reasonable, the fight could do good business and it could be lucrative. Wilder's fans, that faction of the fight fan community, and Andy Ruiz's Chicano contingent. It could be lucrative, and it's realistic.
More realistic than those other four guys.
More realistic than Anthony Joshua or Alexander Usyk, Dillian Whyte or Tyson Fury. Deontay Wilder's not busy with anything right now. He needs to rebound off his latest loss to Tyson Fury. Andy Ruiz versus Deontay Wilder, battle of the former heavyweight champions, is realistic for next year, though not necessarily realistic for the immediate future. I don't know that the Wilder people would want to go straight into a fight like that. They might want a lighter touch before stepping into the ring with a former champion like themselves. We'll see, though if they do, in the year of 2022, it could do very good business.
I don't think that's who he's going to fight in January.
That's when Andy says he's coming back. For the time being, he needs an opponent, a realistic one for the immediate future. And one name almost immediately comes to mind, the name of a former champion who didn't reign as one for very long, Charles Martin. Charles Martin, who he himself not that long ago was campaigning for a Dillian Whyte fight. But Charles, he wasn't in the running the same way that Andy Ruiz was in the running. I could see a situation between Andy Ruiz and Charles Martin.
They could do a fight with those two guys.
There are no world champions in the heavyweight division for the PBC, those who reside on PBC's isolation island. So if they're smart, what they can do is feature Andy Ruiz and Deontay Wilder on the same card in order to build the fight between them. Value for money, as it were. You have Andy Ruiz take on Charles Martin as the co-main and have Deontay Wilder versus Robert Helenius as the main event, the main attraction. Robert Helenius, who just beat Adam Kovnowski for the second time on the undercard of Wilder versus Fury 3. That is the ideal opponent to help get Deontay Wilder back in the winner's bracket. Wilder's got his drawbacks, but I think he packs enough punch to put away Robert Helenius, who, if I'm being honest, is on the up and up, though I'm not sure he can withstand a straight right hand from Deontay Wilder. In an ideal world, that would be the card. That would be the setup. Andy Ruiz versus Charles Martin and Deontay Wilder versus Robert Helenius, all heavyweight action early next year. Because you need a strong card to sell pay-per-views these days.